Shaq is flying to buy a small grocery store. The shop owes $12,400. He wants to help a black family. He wears an old jacket to hide his famous face. No one knows he is a superstar. But on the Azure Wings flight, he gets a gross salad. The food is dead and full of maggots. The lead attendant, Tobias, laughs at him. He calls Shaq a homeless man who won the lottery. Shaq does not argue. He just smiles. He knows what will happen soon. Big legal trouble and a ruined career are waiting for Tobias at the gate. The plane hummed low through the dark sky. Shaq sat folded into seat 19C. His knees pressed hard against the seat in front. His shoulders spilled into the aisle on both sides. He stared down at his tray. Small white worms crawled across a wilted lettuce leaf. His stomach growled and twisted with hunger. He had not eaten since noon. He wore a thin gray jacket with a torn pocket. The fabric was soft from years of washing. His shoes were plain and scuffed at the toes. Nothing about him looked rich. He kept his elbows tight to his body. He did not want to bump the tired mother beside him. She rocked her small son gently in her arms. The boy finally closed his eyes. Outside the tiny window, clouds looked like gray smoke. The engine noise stayed low and steady. It rattled through the floor beneath his feet. He felt every bump the plane made. He had flown coach many times as a boy. Back then, he never had a choice. Now people assumed he always flew private. They forgot he once dreamed of any seat at all. The cabin lights buzzed with a dull yellow glow. A baby cried somewhere near the back. Someone coughed twice behind a thin curtain. The air smelled like stale coffee and dust. Shaq pulled his jacket sleeves down over his wrists. The fabric had a small hole near the elbow. He had refused to buy a new one. Old things reminded him where he came from. Tobias walked down the aisle with his cart. He bumped Shaq's shoulder hard with his elbow. He did not say sorry. He did not even look back. His eyes swept over Shaq's old jacket. His nose wrinkled like he smelled something bad. He moved on without a word. Shaq closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about why he was on this plane. A letter had reached him 3 days ago. The handwriting was shaky but clear. The letter came from a woman named Mabel. She ran a small store called Mabel's Greenery. 30 years ago, she fed him free meals. He was a poor kid in Newark then. Back then, Shaq had holes in his shoes. His mother worked 2 jobs to survive. Some nights, dinner was just bread and water. Mabel never once asked him to pay. She always said the same simple thing. Sit down, baby, and eat something warm. Her small kindness stuck with him for decades. He never forgot the smell of her kitchen. Mabel's store now faced a serious problem. A real estate company wanted her land. They said she owed $12,417.83. If she could not pay, they would take everything. The company sent letters every single week. Each one used cold, threatening legal language. Mabel read them alone at her counter. Her hands shook every time she opened one. She had no children to call for help. She had no savings left to spend. She almost gave up hope completely last month. Then she remembered the boy she once fed. Shaq gripped the worn bag under his seat. Inside sat a folder full of paperwork. It held the plan to save her store. He had signed every page himself. He did not take his private jet this time. He wanted to feel poor again. He wanted to remember the hunger from his childhood. That feeling kept him grounded and humble. His mother, Lucille, always told him something important. Money changes what you have, not who you are. He held on to those words like a rope in deep water. He remembered her tiny kitchen in Newark clearly. The stove always clicked before it lit. Steam rose from pots of simple soup. Neighbors gathered there when times felt hard. His mother sang softly while she cooked dinner. Her voice carried through their thin apartment walls. Money was tight, but her spirit never broke. She taught him that pride came from action. Shaq closed his eyes and pictured her face. Her strength had shaped every choice he made. Even now, sitting cramped in coach class, her lessons guided him more than fame ever could. Tobias came back down the aisle again. This time he leaned in close to Shaq. His voice dripped with fake sweetness and scorn. "Sir, this is a real flight, not a shelter," he said. "Did you win the lottery to get on here?" A few passengers nearby chuckled under their breath. Shaq felt heat rise in his chest. His hands were the same hands that once dunked overgrown men. Strong enough to crush concrete blocks. He thought about standing up and speaking his mind. But then his mother's voice returned to him. A truly strong man tames the beast inside him, she used to say. Shaq took a slow breath instead. He pushed the ruined tray of food aside. He said nothing back to Tobias at all. His silence felt heavier than any shout. A small voice broke through the quiet cabin. It came from seat 19D beside him. A little girl named Lily sat there. She was maybe 7 years old. She had seen the maggots on his salad. Her small face twisted with worry for him. She reached into her bag without asking anyone. She pulled out a granola bar worth $1.50. She snapped it cleanly in half. She held one piece out toward Shaq. "Mister, you should eat this instead," she whispered. "It does not have any bugs in it." Shaq looked down at her tiny hand. Something warm cracked open inside his chest. He took the small piece of granola bar. He thanked her with a quiet nod. Her innocent kindness felt like real medicine. It helped him find his calm again. He realized something important in that moment. Good people still existed on this crowded plane. "What is your name, young lady?" Shaq asked gently. "Lily," she said, swinging her small feet. "My mom says I share too much sometimes." "Sharing is never too much," Shaq replied softly. "Your mom raised you right, Lily." Lily smiled and went back to her coloring book. She drew a picture of a giant bear. She said the bear looked friendly, not scary. Shaq smiled quietly at her simple drawing. He thought about how children saw the world clearly. They judged kindness, not size or clothing. Adults often forgot that simple truth completely. Lily reminded him without even trying. The flight rolled on through the dark hours. Around 2:45 in the morning, turbulence hit hard. The seatbelt sign blinked on and off. The whole cabin shook and rattled. An older man in row 12 gasped loudly. His name was Mr. Miller, sitting near the window. He grabbed his chest with both hands. His breathing came out short and ragged. Passengers around him began to whisper in fear. Someone called out for a flight attendant. Shaq's eyes locked onto the struggling old man. He knew he had to act now. Mr. Miller's wife had passed 3 years earlier. He now traveled alone to visit his son. His son worked far away in another state. This trip meant everything to the old man. His skin turned pale under the dim cabin lights. Sweat gathered along his wrinkled forehead. His fingers trembled against his chest tightly. Fear filled his eyes as he gasped. A nearby woman fumbled with her phone helplessly. She did not know who to call mid-flight. Panic spread quickly through the surrounding seats. No one seemed to know what to do. Shaq unbuckled his seatbelt without hesitation. He stood up tall in the dim cabin. His head nearly touched the low ceiling. He looked like a giant rising from shadow. He moved carefully toward Mr. Miller's row. His steps were slow, gentle, and controlled. He did not want to scare anyone. He only wanted to help this stranger breathe. "Sir, I need oxygen. Over here now," Shaq said firmly to Tobias. His voice stayed calm, but carried real weight. Tobias crossed his arms and did not move. "That old man is faking it," he sneered. "He probably wants a free seat upgrade." Shaq stared at him with quiet disbelief. A human life hung in the balance here. Tobias only cared about rules and appearances. He refused to bring the oxygen tank. "Sit down now," Tobias barked at Shaq, "or I will have you handcuffed at landing." A young flight attendant named Clara watched nearby. Her heart pounded with fear and worry. She saw Mr. Miller's lips turning pale blue. She made a brave choice right then. Clara slipped away toward the back galley. She grabbed the emergency oxygen tank quickly. She carried it low, so Tobias would not see. She handed it straight to Shaq. Clara had worked for Azure Wings for 2 years. She needed this job to pay rent. Her apartment cost more than she truly earned. Losing this job would hurt her badly. Still, something inside her refused to stay quiet. She had watched Tobias treat passengers poorly before. Tonight felt different, more urgent, more wrong. She chose courage over her own safety. Her hands shook slightly as she moved fast. She kept glancing over her shoulder nervously. If Tobias caught her, trouble would follow quickly. She decided the risk was worth it. Shaq had studied first aid for years. He also held an honorary doctorate in medicine. He fitted the oxygen mask over Mr. Miller's face. He counted his pulse with steady fingers. "Breathe slow with me, sir," Shaq said softly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Mr. Miller's breathing began to even out slowly. His color returned bit by bit. His trembling hands finally started to relax. The danger passed like a fading storm. "You're safe now, sir," Shaq said calmly. Just keep breathing nice and slow. Mr. Miller nodded weakly, tears filling his eyes. Thank you, he whispered through shallow breaths. You don't need to thank me yet, Shaq said. Just rest and let your body heal. Other passengers watched in stunned, quiet silence now. The giant man who seemed strange before them suddenly looked calm, gentle, and deeply capable. Their fears slowly shifted into quiet respect. Tobias noticed Clara helping from across the aisle. His face twisted with cold, sharp anger. He marched over and snatched the tank away. You want to lose your job for this filthy old man? He snapped at Clara. For this trash of a giant man? Clara's eyes filled with tears of shame. She said nothing back to defend herself. She feared losing the only job she had. Bills back home would not wait for her. Tobias turned his glare toward Shaq next. You assaulted my crew tonight, he said loudly. I will report you the moment we land. Shaq looked straight into Tobias's eyes. A deep and dangerous stillness filled the cabin. He did not raise his fists at all. He simply reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small satellite phone. He had asked the crew for permission earlier. At 3:12 in the morning, he typed one short message. He sent it, without any anger in his face. The message went to his lawyer Julian. It also reached someone else very important. Someone who could change everything for Tobias. Someone connected to the airline itself. Tobias picked up the intercom microphone next. He wanted the whole cabin to hear him. We have a dangerous passenger on board, he announced. Security will meet him at gate 14. Passengers turned to stare at Shaq with fear. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Only Lily and Mr. Miller looked at him differently. They saw kindness, not danger, in his eyes. Shaq felt the sting of pure injustice. People judged him only by his size. They judged him by his simple, worn clothes. It hurt more than any punch ever could. He thought of every hungry night in Newark. He thought of every door slammed on him. This moment felt painfully familiar and old. Yet he stayed calm through all of it. He remembered being a teenager at a store counter. A clerk once followed him around suspiciously. He had done nothing wrong at all. Only his size made people afraid back then. Years of fame never fully erased that memory. Success gave him money, not automatic respect. Some people still saw only his surface. They never looked deeper at his character. He breathed slowly and let the anger pass. Anger never solved anything worth solving. His mother taught him patience over rage. Patience built things that actually lasted. Mr. Miller slowly opened his eyes fully. He gripped Shaq's massive hand with gratitude. Thank you, gentle giant, he whispered weakly. Shaq felt something settle deep inside him. This was never about money or fame. This was about walking his parents' true path. Use strength to protect, never to crush. The plane finally began its slow descent. At 9:15 in the morning, wheels touched down. The runway lights blurred past the window. Relief washed briefly through the tired cabin. Tobias had worked for Azure Wings for 8 years. He believed strict rules made him powerful. He often bragged about his perfect service record. Tonight, he wanted to prove his authority. He grew up wealthy in a quiet suburb. He never once worried about rent or food. He judged people quickly by their appearance. He never learned what real struggle felt like. Tobias stood by the cabin door smiling. 2 large security guards stood right behind him. He pointed a sharp finger at Shaq's face. Get out now, you monster, Tobias hissed. You will regret ever boarding my flight. Passengers filed past quickly, avoiding eye contact. Shaq gathered his old worn bag slowly. He walked toward the jet bridge with dignity. His head stayed high despite the shame. Lily waved at him from her mother's arms. Bye, gentle giant, she called out sweetly. Shaq smiled at her through the tired crowd. Her small kindness had carried him through tonight. He gave her a soft, grateful nod back. Then he stepped into the narrow jet bridge. His footsteps echoed against the metal walkway. The fluorescent lights buzzed steadily overhead. He kept his pace slow and calm. He refused to let fear rush his steps. Behind him, whispers followed like a cold breeze. Some passengers filmed him with shaking phones. He did not turn around to look. He simply walked forward, carrying his old bag. He reached the end of the long walkway. No police cars waited for him there. Instead, his lawyer Julian stood calmly. Beside him stood a man in an expensive suit. That man was the CEO of Azure Wings. He had just received an urgent message. A message about a strategic shareholder pulling out. That shareholder's name was Shaquille O'Neal. The CEO stepped forward with quick, nervous steps. He bowed his head low to Shaq. Tobias watched this scene in complete horror. His confident smile crumbled into pale shock. Tobias's knees buckled slightly beneath him. He realized his terrible mistake too late. This man could buy his entire career. He could end it in one single sentence. "Mr. O'Neal, I am so deeply sorry," the CEO stammered. "We did not know it was you." Shaq raised one calm hand to stop him. "That is exactly the problem," he said quietly. "You should treat every passenger this way." The CEO's name was Richard Hensley. He had led Azure Wings for 6 years. He built his brand on trust and comfort. Tonight threatened to ruin everything he built. Julian stepped forward holding a thin folder. Inside sat documents about Shaq's investment stake. Shaq owned a large share of the company. That share now hung in careful balance. "Mr. O'Neal has decided to pull his investment," Julian said calmly. "Unless real changes happen immediately, starting tonight." Richard's forehead beaded with nervous sweat instantly. Losing that investment would crash company stock badly. He needed to fix this crisis fast. The CEO's face turned pale with understanding. He looked back at Tobias with cold disappointment. Word of this incident would spread fast. Cameras nearby had already caught everything. Security guards stepped back from Shaq quietly. They realized their mistake almost immediately. No handcuffs were needed here at all. The real danger stood in Tobias's uniform. Richard turned toward his shaking flight attendant. "Explain yourself right now," he demanded sharply. Tobias stammered, searching for any excuse available. "He looked dangerous, sir. His size, his clothes." "His clothes do not matter," Richard interrupted firmly. "You mocked a passenger without any reason." Shaq did not raise his fist against Tobias. Instead, he offered something far more meaningful. He told the CEO exactly what he wanted done. "Send him to work in Newark," Shaq said. 6 months cleaning small grocery stores there. He needs to learn what real struggle feels like. The CEO nodded quickly, eager to please him. Tobias's face went white with shock. His fancy uniform suddenly felt heavy and wrong. His career had ended in one hallway. "Please," Tobias said, his voice cracking slightly. "I have a family to support." Shaq looked at him, without any anger left. "So did every passenger you mocked tonight," he said. "Think about that while you work." Tobias lowered his head, saying nothing more. Guilt finally settled where arrogance once stood. He removed his airline badge slowly and quietly. He handed it to Richard without protest. News spread through the airport within minutes. Passengers had filmed the whole tense scene. Videos showed Tobias mocking the disguised billionaire. The internet reacted with fast, furious anger. Azure Wings released a public statement within hours. They confirmed Tobias was fired immediately that day. They also added him to a permanent blacklist. No airline would ever hire him again. The statement apologized directly to every passenger involved. It promised new training for all staff members. It promised better treatment for every future traveler. Richard signed the statement himself personally. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Reporters called it a lesson in humility. Some praised Shaq for staying calm throughout. Others praised Clara for her quiet courage. Tobias tried calling other airlines for work. Every single one rejected his application instantly. His name now carried a heavy warning. Nobody wanted that kind of trouble nearby. He sat alone in his empty apartment that night. His phone buzzed with angry messages from strangers. He finally understood how deeply he had failed. Pride had cost him everything he built. Shaq refused every offer of financial compensation. He asked for something different entirely instead. He requested a public donation to local children. The airline agreed without any hesitation at all. They wrote a check for $100,000. The money went straight to a Newark charity. It would feed and support poor children there. Shaq watched the announcement without any pride. The charity ran a small after-school program nearby. Kids received warm meals and homework help there. Many came from families struggling, just like his once did. The donation would keep the doors open longer. A local news reporter asked Shaq for comment. He simply said the money should speak instead. He refused every interview request that followed. He wanted to focus on the children, not himself. The charity director cried when she opened the letter. She had worried about closing next month. Now her program could run for 2 more years. Relief washed over her tired shoulders completely. She called her small staff together with the news. They hugged each other and celebrated quietly. New tables and chairs arrived within the month. The kids finally had a warm, safe place to gather. One boy asked why a stranger helped them so much. The director simply smiled and said kindness travels far. She never learned the donor's full identity either. She only knew someone once hungry remembered their pain. That thought comforted her long after the meeting finally ended. He drove an old rented truck through familiar streets. The Newark neighborhood looked tired but warm. Cracked sidewalks led toward Mabel's small store. Faded paint covered the wooden sign outside. Kids rode bicycles past cracked front steps nearby. An old man swept his porch slowly. A dog barked twice behind a chain fence. Everything felt exactly like he remembered it. He parked the truck near a fire hydrant. He sat for a moment, just breathing deeply. Memories flooded back faster than he expected. This street had shaped every part of him. He remembered running these blocks barefoot as a boy. He remembered hiding from rain under this awning. Time had changed the paint, not the feeling. Home still felt the same after all these years. A neighbor waved at him from across the street. He waved back, though she did not recognize him. He smiled and stepped out of the truck slowly. The familiar sidewalk cracks felt like old friends. Mabel stood behind her counter, folding cloth napkins. Her hands shook slightly from age and worry. She looked up and saw a familiar giant. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Shaquille, is that really you?" she whispered softly. "You came all this way for me." Shaq smiled and stepped through the creaky door. He pulled the folder from his worn bag. Inside sat papers marked paid in full. Mabel's unpaid debt of $12,000 vanished. The real estate company had been fully paid. Shaq had bought the surrounding block as well. No developer could ever threaten her again. Mabel covered her mouth with trembling fingers. "Why would you do all this for me?" she asked through happy tears. "You fed a hungry kid." "Without asking questions," Shaq said gently. "Now I feed you back." He sat down on an old wooden stool. Mabel handed him a simple grilled cheese sandwich. It was cheap, warm, and perfectly clean this time. He took a slow, grateful bite. "Tastes just like I remember," Shaq said, smiling. Mabel laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "Same old recipe, baby. Nothing fancy about it." "Nothing fancy is exactly what makes it perfect," he replied. She sat across from him at the counter. They talked for over an hour about old times. She remembered every regular customer from those years. He remembered every kind word she had spoken. She showed him an old photograph from decades earlier. A skinny boy stood grinning beside her counter. Shaq laughed softly at his younger, hungrier self. Some things never truly leave a person's memory. She told him about her late husband's dreams for the shop. He had wanted it to last for generations. Mabel had almost lost that dream forever. Now it stood a real chance again. Outside the window, children played basketball on fresh pavement. Shaq had paid to repair that court himself. Their laughter floated through the open door. It sounded like pure, simple joy. He looked down at the stamped paper again. The word paid stood out in bold red ink. It represented far more than cleared debt. It represented dignity finally restored to someone good. Clara received a quiet message a few days later. It came from an unknown, generous account. Her rent for the entire year was covered. A note simply read, "Thank you for your courage." She cried at her kitchen table that evening. No one had ever recognized her bravery before. That night on the plane had changed everything. Kindness had finally found its way back to her. She called her mother immediately to share the news. Her mother cried happy tears over the phone. "You did the right thing," her mother said. "That old man is alive because of you." Clara returned to work the following week. Her co-workers treated her differently now, with respect. Passengers sometimes recognized her from the viral video. They thanked her quietly as they boarded planes. She never learned the tall stranger's real identity fully. She only knew he had trusted her instantly. That trust gave her courage she never knew she had. She carried that lesson into every future flight. Mr. Miller sent a heartfelt letter to the airline. He praised the gentle giant who saved his life. He never learned Shaq's real name that night. He only remembered the calm, steady hands. He finally reached his son's house safely 2 days later. He hugged his son tighter than usual that morning. He told him about the giant stranger who saved him. His son listened with wide, grateful eyes. Mr. Miller visited his doctor for a full checkup. The doctor said quick action had saved his life. Another few minutes could have ended differently. He thanked whoever taught that giant stranger first aid. He kept a small notebook of grateful memories afterward. He wrote about the granola bar and the giant. He wrote about kindness appearing when least expected. He read that page every single morning after. Lily's mother posted a small story online later. She described her daughter sharing a granola bar. She never knew who the tired giant truly was. She only knew her daughter had been kind. Weeks passed, and Mabel's greenery slowly reopened fully. Fresh vegetables filled the wooden shelves again. Neighbors lined up outside just to shop there. The little store finally felt truly safe. Mabel hired 2 local teenagers to help her. They stocked shelves and swept the floors daily. She taught them patience, just like she once taught Shaq. The store became a small classroom for kindness. She started a simple program for hungry kids nearby. Any child could get a free meal there. No questions asked, no shame involved at all. She remembered exactly how that felt as a child herself. Word spread through the neighborhood about her kindness. More donations arrived from strangers near and far. The little store grew stronger every single week. Community support replaced fear and uncertainty completely. Shaq never returned publicly to claim any credit. He preferred quiet actions over loud praise. His mother Lucille had taught him that lesson well. True power needed no announcement or applause. Reporters tried tracking down the mystery donor for weeks. They found only silence and closed doors. Julian handled every question with calm, careful answers. He protected Shaq's privacy exactly as instructed. Some neighbors guessed the truth quietly among themselves. They noticed his size matched old basketball photos. Still, no one confirmed it publicly to reporters. Newark protected its own, just like always. Shaq preferred it exactly this way, unbothered and hidden. Fame had never fed him as a child. Quiet kindness had fed him instead, every time. He chose to repay that debt the same way. Somewhere in Newark, an old wooden bench remained. Shaq used to sit there as a boy. He often returned there just to think. It reminded him where his strength truly began. He thought about Tobias sweeping floors in Newark. Ironically, he now worked near this very block. Perhaps scrubbing these streets would teach him something. Perhaps he would finally understand real hunger. Tobias arrived for his first shift nervously. The community program placed him at a food pantry. He expected pity looks from the people working there. Instead, they simply handed him a mop. An older worker named Frank showed him around quietly. Frank had once struggled with hunger himself. He did not judge Tobias for his past mistakes. He only asked him to work hard now. Tobias scrubbed floors and stacked cans for hours daily. He listened to stories from families needing help. Slowly, something inside him began to shift. Arrogance gave way to quiet understanding, day by day. By his second month, he stopped complaining entirely. He started arriving early without being asked. Frank noticed the change and nodded with approval. Growth sometimes started with the simplest humble tasks. Shaq did not seek revenge or punishment for cruelty. He sought correction, growth, and quiet lessons instead. Every person deserved a chance to learn humility, even those who once mocked his silence. The story of that flight spread across town. People spoke of a giant who stayed calm. They spoke of a girl who shared her snack. They spoke of dignity winning over cruelty. No headline ever used his famous name directly. Most people only heard a kind stranger helped. That was exactly how Shaq wanted it told. Quiet impact mattered more than loud fame. Back at the store, Mabel hung a new sign. It read simply, "Kindness fed us here first." She never explained the full story to customers. She only smiled whenever someone asked about it. Shaq flew home days later on a different airline. He wore the same old, torn gray jacket. No one on this flight recognized him either. He preferred it that way completely. He looked out the small, oval window quietly. Clouds drifted below like soft cotton fields. He thought about his mother's steady voice again. Power without kindness was never truly powerful. A young boy across the aisle stared at him curiously. He whispered something to his father beside him. His father just smiled and shook his head. Shaq gave the boy a friendly nod back. The boy grinned wide and waved happily. The boy smiled shyly and looked away again. Shaq remembered being that curious once himself. Curiosity was innocent, never something to fear. He hoped the boy stayed kind as he grew. The flight attendant this time offered him a warm meal. She smiled genuinely while serving every single passenger. No maggots, no cruelty, no cold judgment anywhere. Simple decency felt like the greatest gift of all. He thought about Lily's small hand offering food. He thought about Clara's brave, quiet choice. He thought about Mabel's decades of quiet generosity. Small acts had built something much larger than money. The plane landed smoothly under a clear blue sky. Shaq stepped off carrying only his worn bag. No cameras waited for him this time. Just an ordinary morning, exactly how he liked it. He walked through the quiet terminal at his own pace. People passed him without a second glance. That anonymity felt like a warm, familiar blanket. He smiled softly at the simple freedom of it. Outside, the morning air felt crisp and clean. A taxi waited near the curb for him. He climbed in, still wearing his old gray jacket. The driver never once suspected who sat behind him. He watched the city blur past the window. Somewhere behind him, Newark carried on quietly. Mabel's shelves stayed stocked, and her lights stayed on. Small victories rippled outward, unseen but lasting. Far behind him, Tobias knelt scrubbing a dusty floor. Newark's morning sun poured through cracked windows. He thought about the giant he once mocked. He finally understood what true strength looked like. The children outside kept playing on their new court. Their laughter echoed through the quiet Newark streets. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang inside Mabel's store. Another customer walked in, smiling and hopeful. A little girl bounced a basketball near the fence. She wore mismatched socks and a bright red hat. She reminded him faintly of himself at that age, full of energy, hope, and simple dreams. Her laughter carried easily across the quiet street. She missed her shot and laughed at herself loudly. Her friends cheered her on without any teasing. That small moment captured everything Shaq valued deeply: joy, effort, and kindness among ordinary people. He thought about how one granola bar started all this. One small act of kindness from a stranger. It rippled outward until it changed several lives. Small things always mattered more than people realized. Shaq's silence had spoken louder than any shout. His stillness had changed more than any threat. In the end, dignity found its way home. Just like it always eventually does. Somewhere, Clara boarded another flight with renewed confidence. Somewhere, Mr. Miller hugged his son a little tighter. Somewhere, Lily shared her snacks without ever hesitating. Kindness had quietly rewritten each of their stories. Tobias kept scrubbing floors, learning something new daily. His pride had broken, but something better grew there. Humility took root where arrogance once stood tall. Change, however slow, still counted as real progress. And somewhere in Newark, an old wooden stool waited. A giant man would return there someday soon. Not for fame, not for cameras, not for praise. Just for grilled cheese, memories, and quiet gratitude.